Welcome everybody to the KRTA. This is the Power of Peers, strategies for incorporating people with lived experience into probation and parole departments. My name is Emil Karen. I am a certified recovery peer specialist. I work as the Director of Recovery Support Services for Recovery Connections of Central Florida. Steven Samra is also one of our presenters. We had this conversation last week and we recorded it due to some conflicts that he had.
I'm Steven Samra, Emil Karan, Director of Recovery Support Services with the Recovery Connections of Florida. And of course, Steven Samra, your host here today as a senior associate and dedicated specialist with C4 Innovations. Both of us are people in recovery with the lived experience of incarceration and our journey through parole probation, successful journey, I should say. And Emil's got a background in participation in drug court, and he'll talk about that as we move through. Today, what we're trying to do is we'll give you some information related to some strategies that we think are going to be helpful in engaging probation and parole as a peer, and then supporting folks that probation and parole may be supervising. It's a collaborative relationship, and Emil's going to talk a lot more about that as we move forward. So what we're going to do today, by the end of this session, folks should be able to understand the value and significance of incorporating individuals with lived experience that have been trained and certified as peer specialists or recovery coaches into the probation and parole workforce. This includes understanding the roles and responsibilities and the unique perspectives that peers bring to the field and the benefits of incorporating their expertise into the probation and parole system. We should all be able to gain some additional insight into the very diverse backgrounds, experiences, and the challenges faced by individuals with the lived experience of mental illness, of substance use disorders, trauma, etc. And in addition, there will be strategies to enhance cultural competence in working with peers, including effective communication, building a little trust, and then, of course, promoting inclusivity. This objective will also focus on addressing potential biases and stigmas associated with mental health, with addiction, and importantly, criminal justice involvement. We'll also talk about building some collaborative partnerships, and we'll try to share some strategies for developing and maintaining those partnerships, particularly between probation and parole agencies and the peers that work with them. This includes understanding the importance of mutual respect, clear expectations, and effective communication in building successful partnerships. You should also be able to understand how to establish processes for sharing information and trying to coordinate your services, and then ensuring that we bring a team approach to supporting individuals who are under supervision. We should be talking about professional development, and we'll explore some opportunities for professional growth and the advancement for peer workers within probation and parole. And this includes the importance of training, supervision, and ongoing support for peer workers to maintain their skills and expertise. Folks will also learn strategies for promoting the professional development and well-being of peer specialists, including self-care, resilience, and career advancement pathways. So we're going to dive in and first start talking a little bit about what peers actually are bringing to the table. And to do that, we kind of need to know what it is that we're actually dealing with. So for our purposes, I just want to kind of get us up to speed from, really pre-pandemic to today. At year-end 2020, An estimated 3,800,000 adults were under community supervision. An estimated 1 in 66 adults were under community supervision at the end of 2020. The adult probation population actually declined during 2020. That's the largest annual decrease since 1980, when the Bureau of Justice began the probation collection data. During 2020, probation population decreased in 42 states, the District of Columbia, and the US federal system, and unfortunately, it actually increased in 7 states. Year-end 2020, 862,000 adults were on parole supervision. That's been an increase of about 1.3% from January 1, 2020. During 2020, the parole population increased in 30 states, but decreased in 19 states, the District of Columbia, and the US federal system's term of supervised release. The adult probation rate per 100,000 adult US residents at year-end 2020 was actually at the lowest point in 35 years. And from 2005 to 2020, the community supervision rate actually decreased 32% from 2,200 approximately to 1,500 per 100,000 adult US residents. Most folks who get released from incarceration in the criminal justice system actually return to prison within about 3 years. And I want to clarify that it's actually not most people. It is a significant number. But the truth is that many of the people who are released never return. Now, to improve community reentry, there have been some national initiatives that have promoted new and revitalized programming, including peer mentorship and support, though this approach still remains unstudied. That's a challenge in most peer work, but slowly but surely we are building the evidence base, and there are a number of universities currently engaged in evaluation of peer services. So we are really starting to see some important numbers, particularly around positive outcomes and the ability to increase those outcomes. When you pair a peer worker with a clinician, a parole or probation officer, the outcomes are better when both folks are coming at the individual in a supportive way than if either one of them tried to do it on their own. There was a small pilot that was a randomized control trial that investigated the effect of peer mentorship upon recidivism. And the peer mentorship model focuses upon early intervention, relationship quality, criminal desistance, social navigation, and then gainful employment and citizenship. And the whole idea is that it promotes the really complex task of early community reentry. And there's a lot of reason to believe that one group of peers can provide support to persons during the time they are reentering, while another group may simultaneously exert a criminogenic influence. We're going to talk a little bit about the culture of addiction, the culture of incarceration, the culture of homelessness, a little further into this training, but that's exactly what they're talking about. And evidence suggests that peer support may be at least in part responsible for the declining number of people on supervision. Generally, incorporating folks with lived experience into the justice system workforce can enhance the effectiveness, the inclusivity, and the person-centeredness of the entire justice system. And as I mentioned earlier, it leads to better outcomes for those who are under supervision and again, importantly, for the communities that they exist in and reside in. There are unique perspectives and empathy that the peers bring to the table. It's because they have lived experience with the criminal justice system. They may have mental health challenges or addiction challenges or all of the above. And they can bring this really unique perspective and some empathy to their work with individuals who are under that supervision. They can better understand the challenges and the barriers and the needs that are faced by the folks they're serving. And while that's all happening, they get to use their personal experience to build some rapport, to establish a little trust, and to promote and continue to promote positive change for the individual they're walking alongside. There's some enhanced engagement and empowerment that comes with the peer intervention, and peers can serve as a relatable role model who is able to inspire and motivate individuals who are under supervision. They can use their personal stories of recovery and resilience to instill hope, boost that engagement, and then empower an individual to take ownership of their own recovery and rehabilitation journey. Peers can also use that credibility to connect individuals to community resources, to support networks, and then to opportunities for personal and professional growth that they've used and experienced in the past. Cultural competence and inclusivity is critical, and peers who come from diverse backgrounds and have their own lived experience are able to bridge some big cultural gaps at times. And they do it by promoting that inclusivity within probation and parole. Anybody who has passed through that system recognizes the very strict segregation that occurs based primarily on race, and bridging those cultural gaps and those cultural challenges and barriers that exist when people are released is a skill that peers can bring to the table that pretty much nobody else can. They do bring awareness to issues related to race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and other forms of identity. And they do promote culturally competent approaches to supervision and support. Peers can also help reduce stigma, bias, and discrimination. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And they can promote fair and equitable practices. Collaborative partnerships and system improvement. Peers can serve as valuable team members who collaborate with probation and parole, with mental health professionals, with other stakeholders, all to improve the outcomes for individuals who might be under that supervision. And that if working together with probation and parole, they can provide insights and feedback on program effectiveness. They can help identify some gaps or challenges in the services, and they can contribute to system improvement efforts ongoing. That's really important as the whole approach continues to evolve. And then peers absolutely can help reduce recidivism rates, improve public safety, and promote a more person-centered and recovery-oriented approach to the supervision in general.
By sharing lived experience, it can help dispel misconceptions, challenge stereotypes, and humanize individuals who have been impacted by these issues. Authenticity builds trust and rapport, and it fosters a more open and honest relationship. And it can also break down the barriers and promote a non-judgmental approach and create a safe space for individuals who are on supervision to share their experiences and their needs without concern or fear of stigma or discrimination. They can also share accurate information, evidence-based practices, and insights into systemic and societal factors that contribute to these biases and stigmas. By sharing lived experience, they can help dispel misconceptions, challenge stereotypes, and humanize individuals who have been impacted by these issues. An authentic peer can help build trust, rapport, and even foster a more open and honest communication between the person on probation and the officer. This can help break down barriers and promote a non-judgmental approach and create a safe space for individuals who are on supervision to share their experiences and their needs without fear or concern of stigma and discrimination. They can share more accurate information, evidence-based practices, and insights into systemic and societal factors that contribute to these biases and stigmas. And it can also promote practical guidance, emotional support, and motivation based on their own experiences of recovery and resilience. Peer support from individuals with lived experience can be highly effective in reducing stigma and promoting self-advocacy and improving overall well-being. Personal anecdote about stigma for myself, I'm a person who uses medication-assisted treatment for my recovery. I've seen and dealt with a lot of stigma around this in the justice system. And, it was a challenge for me to advocate for myself and needing these medications when the courts at that time had their own biases and stigmas around it. If I would have had a peer mentor at that time, it would have really helped me get through those challenges without, feeling so alone in that situation. Developing and maintaining collaborative partnerships is extremely important between probation, parole, peer specialists, and the people they serve. And it has to be intentional effort and strategies to make this happen. This can include training on unique skills, perspectives, and boundaries of peer specialists, and educating the value of lived experience in the supervision process. It's extremely important to define roles and responsibilities of a peer specialist and the limitations that a peer specialist may allow for a better collaborative approach. Effective communication and coordination can also help ensure that all team members are on the same page and working towards the same goals. Please allow peers to have a seat at the table. It's extremely important that we be involved in the processes and not left to the fringe or on the outside. Recognizing the valuable expertise, perspectives, and contributions of each team member, including peer specialists, can provide a positive work environment. And also, regular supervision is extremely important to provide feedback, guidance, and support of the peers, while professional development opportunities such as training, mentoring, and networking can help them continue to grow in their role. Establishing mechanisms for ongoing evaluation and feedback are also extremely important. They help ensure this collaborative partnership, between probation and parole, peer specialists, and the people that they're working with. This is not much different than the relationship between a peer specialist and the person on supervision. We want to model that same behavior. Professional development and wellness. Supervision and mentoring can help the peer specialist reflect on their practice, address challenges, and develop strategies for self-care and resilience. Establishing peer support groups, online forums, or other platforms where peer specialists can share experiences, exchange ideas, and provide mutual support. We have here the Peer Coalition, which is a network of peers that are all in different areas of the community, coming together to help, take a more collaborative approach on the things that they're doing in the community. Providing resources and tools for self-care, such as mindfulness exercises and stress reduction, and coping strategies for dealing with emotional demands are extremely important. One of the things I've just implemented recently with my staff is mandatory self-care put in the calendar so that there's, an intentional self-care taken at least once a week where they have something that's built into their schedule. Self-care can also include identifying career progression opportunities with the organization, promoting opportunities based on experience and performance, and providing access to professional development to support career goals, because we come into this workforce in early recovery or, maybe a year into recovery, and we may have not been as far developed in our professional career path as others. So it's important for us to develop that career path, and it does help improve on our self-esteem and our self-care as well. Recognizing and appreciating the contribution of peers can help contribute to their satisfaction and well-being. This can include acknowledging their achievements, providing feedback and praise for work, and celebrating successes. Returning citizens, as we like to call them, especially those who've spent considerable time behind bars, often re-enter society with some serious challenges related to that experience, in addition to all the other challenges they face generally as they re-enter. Things like institutionalized personality traits, which develop from traumatic experiences of incarceration, can also include a chronic state of learned helplessness in the face of prison authorities and antisocial maladaptive defenses in dealing with the prison environment, like the behaviors adapted to deal with other prisoners and often strict segregation rules, both formal and informal. Post-traumatic stress disorder comes in two directions. Post-incarceration trauma and trauma experienced within the institution should be expected, as well as trauma behaviors and responses. And this also should include sexual trauma. Antisocial personality traits are developed as a way to cope with abusive and traumatic nature of incarceration, from adapting response to engagement behavior within the environment to deal with both staff and other inmates. Social sensory deprivation syndrome is caused by long-term exposure to solitary confinement or places and environments that drastically restrain social contact and any kind of sensory stimulation. These are serious challenges for anyone to overcome, and peer workers with the history of incarceration both understand these and understand how to support someone who has experienced one or more of these challenges. Peer recovery coaching and mentoring are processes that help justice-involved individuals, and there are many ways this occurs. We explore the prospect of leading good lives. Remember the post-incarceration syndrome of institutionalized personality, because often newly released individuals are in a chronic state of learned helplessness as a result of their downtime. We develop a practical approach to setting and achieving goals. Many justice-involved persons struggle with both short and long-term goal setting as a result of chaotic and unstable living conditions. We build trust with those who are or may be receiving services and supports in the future. Corrections is almost always seen as an adversary rather than a potential source of support, and individuals often ignore or participate as minimally as possible with the services or resources and community connections of probation and parole. Building a relationship with probation, parole, corrections, public defender, and even the judge can be critical in getting the supports that one may need. For example, upon completion of the drug court program, the state and public defender helped me getting into my CRPS, or Certified Recovery Peer Specialist position, or my credentialing, by removing or null processing my felony charges from my record. And this allowed me to more easily get through the criminal background check for the level 2, which is required to become a certified peer specialist. Other supports or examples of this include removing court fines from collections to help people acquire a driver's license. Probation, I've seen in the departments that I work with, they will help people with funds for housing. They have also incidentals for bicycles, bus passes, and then, even early termination or grace for community control, like hours going out where you've built in personal time into the schedule. These can all really, really help impact someone who's on supervision. Peers are the key to building these relationships. Recently, a person that I've been working with who was released from prison, he's on supervision. He had a slip. He owned it, but he was very scared to go back and turn himself in because he's been to prison 7 times already. I was able to facilitate the interaction between him and his officer. And they were willing to work with him because of that communication. They were going to release him on an ankle monitor rather than sending him back to prison, because this person was really trying. So it's great to be able to have a peer to facilitate those interactions. With agency approval, a reentry peer may be able to reduce or eliminate barriers by providing services pre-release, which is critically important to reentry. Contact at release, preferably in person. Meeting someone at the gate when they walk out the door is a massive thing, and I've seen it time and time. The chaplain at the jail I used to work at would tell me he could tell your future by who picked you up from the jail, and I firmly believe that. Next, we have supporting immediate needs like rapid access to medications, people being able to have access to medication-assisted treatment when they're released from incarceration is hugely preventative of an overdose and ongoing recovery. And then we also have singular contact throughout the reentry process, which is also extremely important for building rapport and maintaining that relationship. It is vital for the employer and correction staff to provide guidance in determining the best process for peer engagement and support within the facility. Without the buy-in of the leadership and the rest of the team, peers will be left to feel alone in this situation and oftentimes stigmatized and may not end up staying in that position. Where do we find qualified peers for reentry support? This is a good question. Individuals who have gone through the transition from jail or to prison to the community can provide valuable peer support. They can provide a plan for reentry and identify safe housing and learn triggers or issues that could lead people back to the justice system. Peer staff may be employed by the jail or by in-reach providers to deliver transitional planning services. The goal of one of the chiefs at the jail I used to work at was always to have a person who went all the way through that program be a peer in the program in the future. And I think we're close to achieving that as we reach the 2-year mark of that program. You can also find peers in many different places. Here are a few examples: local behavioral health, mental health, or substance use treatment providers, recovery community centers or recovery community organizations, which is where I'm currently working, and we provide peers for drug court programs. We provide reentry peers and the reason for this, I'll go briefly, is that a recovery community organization is a peer-led grassroots organization, and we provide a culture of peer support for the staff, and we supervise peers with peers, and it's a great place to look if you're interested in finding peer staff for your programs. Crisis response teams are another place we find peers, state and local peer training providers, and state and local government agencies charged with credentialing. Like here we have the Florida Certification Board, and I know California recently got their certification trainings up as well. Recruiting, hiring, and retaining peer staff. Build a relationship with local peer-run organizations such as recovery community organizations, as I mentioned earlier. Learn about the availability of existing peer services and how to access them. To find more about these organizations, contact the Gain Center, and we should be able to provide that link. Begin by establishing a leadership or supervisory type position within your organization and fill that position first. Exploring existing practice and standards, core competencies, training programs, certification opportunities and requirements, and the job descriptions to inform the hiring process. Avoid charging fees to peers for application, training, and background checks. We take care of all those fees, and it's been something that has been well received by the peers we hire on. Prioritize experience with the criminal justice system. Hire more peers than one peer staff member whenever possible. It's great to have a team of peers as they can support each other as they have their own unique challenges in the workforce. Set clear and realistic expectations related to job duties and performance, and make sure you have a clear job description. Review those expectations with the peer staff prior to hiring and on a regular basis. Encourage and support self-care, as I mentioned earlier. Plan for it. Engage peer staff in comprehensive training and encourage them to pursue opportunities for continuing education, skill building, and growth within the agency or organization. Ensure that compensation for peer staff is adequate and reflects the value and effectiveness of the work. I would say ensure that compensation for peer staff is more than adequate, because I think the role of peers has been undervalued, and it's only just now coming to light that peers are absolutely crucial in these roles. As you can see, there are a lot of right areas for peer reentry work, and the benefits of reentry peers can also help fill gaps in services, provide targeted knowledge, expert targeted knowledge across any agency or organization as a whole from internal and external communication to resources, committee structures, just to name a few. Peers can also influence and expand agency culture and overall recovery orientation. Peers can also bring a cohort of talent for career development. I see this every day when I am looking to find more peers. People in recovery know other people in recovery. People from reentry know other people from reentry. We have a cohort, as it says here. Job hunting, interpersonal relations, sobriety, ending or reducing the use of illicit substance misuse, and are trained to use target pieces of their own recovery, not to relive the old days, but instead to point out places along the journey where they went awry, providing valuable coaching, mentoring, and modeling to the returning citizen. Barriers and challenges to successful probation and parole completion. One of the reasons reentry is so challenging is because of the multiple barriers that are often like dominoes. When one arises, two or three more pop up in its place. Unstable housing or homelessness may include peripheral barriers and collateral consequences like a type of conviction, past evictions and or arrears, and no employment to pay for housing. This is something I see literally every day. People struggle with housing due to felony convictions. People are being released from incarceration, so naturally they don't have any money. They can't get into a place without having some type of money. So there are a lot of reentry support nowadays. Like around here, we have organizations that will help a person who's returning to society with at least 1 month of rent to get them back on their feet. But the challenge is also finding housing that will allow a person with felony background. Stigma from the mainstream community is a major barrier to almost everything that a returning citizen is attempting to do. Studies shown that less than 2 people in 10 would be okay with a justice-involved individual convicted of a crime working alongside them, or having them move in next door, or engaging with their family members in any capacity. These barriers can be overwhelming, and they can destroy hope and any desire to try anymore. When a person loses hope, they're at risk of developing maladaptive coping and survival methods, which usually ends up in a major reason why they return to substance use or recidivate as a result, and then end up back in jail or prison. While barriers exist, several on this slide are exceptionally challenging. Post-incarceration syndrome, lack of general support, racism and historical trauma, stigma, bias, trauma, again, mental and or substance use disorders, lack of community knowledge. Transportation is another barrier. We've been able to implement Uber Health recently to help people who are returning to society with getting to, for example, our organization or any other health appointments like MAT. And we've seen major engagement due to this, lowering this barrier of transportation. Often poor or spotty work history is also a major barrier. Timely medication access, as I just mentioned. If a person leaves incarceration and they need to have access to medication-assisted treatment, waiting 3 days is not an option, unfortunately, because the first time a person uses it after incarceration is almost always a deadly use. Broken families do not want people back typically. Substandard education, poverty, unemployment, lack of job skills, unstable housing, or homelessness. Those are all major barriers that we see literally on a daily basis. Peer interventions for reentry barriers and challenges. Peers bring a lot to the table, especially when working in reentry. We won't cover everything here on this slide, but there are a few interventions that peers can bring to the challenges and barriers. Linkage with community resources. And the reason why this is important is because a person who has already gone through these challenges, reentry, substance use disorder, they've already had contact with all of these resources in the community, and they can then in turn share that knowledge with the next person that needs access. Recovery community organizations, as I mentioned before, an invaluable resource for people with reentry, substance use disorder, or mental health challenges. Building a trusting relationship assisting in court-related issues. Just a little bit on that. I attend court on a regular basis with people that I know who have a substance use disorder and they may be reoffending. And I try and advocate for treatment on their behalf because it can be very difficult to speak up if you're not used to advocating for yourself. And, the courts can be very intimidating. Engaging with law enforcement and bringing their own recovery forward as an example and a model. Build trusting relationships with probation and parole. I have a fantastic relationship with my old probation officer. We literally talk almost every day. And I'm not paid by them, but I keep a good rapport and good relations with them because I know a lot of people that are going through that program, and it helps to have someone, be a middleman in a lot of those transactions. Mentoring and advocacy from peer teaches how to advocate for oneself effectively. So when I model this behavior to people that are on supervision, it gives them hope essentially that they will eventually be able to interact in that same way. Mentoring someone through that supervision process, I have seen great success with this. I don't get paid to do that. It's something I do on my own time, but they need to know that other people have completed probation successfully, because a lot of us in that position never knew that it was possible. Helping newcomers navigate drug court. Mentoring new participants in medication-assisted treatment in drug court was another experience that I had. Sharing key pieces of lived experience, helping in navigating systems, connecting to treatment, identifying employers is a huge one there. The higher returning citizen, brainstorming reentry challenges, reorienting to society, like, for example, using a cell phone or texting. I had to teach someone what emojis were, who was recently released from incarceration. And there's so many more other things that go into this one. All right, I'm passing it back to Stephen.
Emil, that was amazing. Thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom. There's one thing that, just occurred to me as you were going through all this. You have shared with me in the past that you had recycled in and out of a particular courtroom in front of the same judge for a number of times. Can you talk just a little bit about what actually occurred that made you able not to go in front of that judge again as a person facing, a potential sentence, but instead as now a very valuable peer within the drug court process? Can you share just a little bit about that experience?
Absolutely. So I was in drug court, as I mentioned, and I had faced 7 sanctions for relapse. I literally would get maybe 2 weeks of recovery, and then I would slip, and this kept happening 7 times. The judge had mandated that I be sent to treatment, which I probably needed anyways, but I was afraid to speak up and say something about it. But the real kicker here was that at this time, the drug courts in my area weren't allowing people to use FDA-approved medications like Suboxone or buprenorphine. And the doctors at the treatment program where I was at were telling me that this was, an option for me that might help me in my recovery. And so I made a really educated, well-informed decision to try and advocate for myself in the courts, which was really hard considering I was very emotional due to post-acute withdrawal syndrome. I was very emotional. I could hardly contain myself, but I knew that if I could get on this medication, I stood a chance of succeeding. But if not, I knew that I was doomed to go back to prison. And the judge heard me out. She allowed me to take buprenorphine, and when I was released from treatment, I breezed right through the program with literally no stops or no sanctions at all. And I've been able to go back in now and advocate for other people to get on this medications. They were very slow to change their policies around this. But being able to model that success was important in them keeping an open mind for new participants coming into the program to be able to use that medication as well.
Emil, I tell you, man, when you share that story, I am not kidding you. It brings tears to my eyes because I know I kicked in jail. I remember that experience. Just, you know, my COs, the officers had me in a large pod that they locked every other door and then let me just wander in the day room, sick as a dog. And there was no chance of getting anything like medication-assisted treatment. And at that time, you know, like so many other places, it was, hey, you did this to yourself, enjoy your withdrawal, without any knowledge at that time of the neurobiological underpinnings of what was driving that, that addiction and the behavior. So the point, I think, ultimately is you advocated for yourself, which is really difficult for many of us, particularly with addiction histories, because of the punitive nature and the way that the internalized stigma impacts those of us who have those addiction histories, really sort of creates a vicious cycle of using the substance to, just quiet the, that internal voice screaming that you're, worthless and have no value. And the substance use then adds to that feeling. So you use more substances to get a break from that feeling, and you can see where that takes you. So for anyone, particularly in what Emil called post-acute withdrawal syndrome, which is the impact for a vast majority of individuals with an opioid use disorder that arises about 90 days after they've stopped using an opioid. And it's a very common, very challenging thing for people to deal with. And it often goes unrecognized by treatment providers, by probation parole officers, because it really looks more like, honestly, that you're using and that you're in an early withdrawal stage. So all this to say that having, Emil's voice in that courtroom opened the door for people coming behind him that would have never had that opportunity had he not done what he had done. So it really mattered. Let me talk a little bit about the influence of subcultures of addiction and incarceration, because they play a pretty big role. And it's important that we realize, we've talked about, how critical being culturally competent and culturally proficient is in the work that we do as peers and recovery coaches. If you're a peer worker, you recognize. So when we talk about the addiction and incarceration and homelessness cultures, for whatever reason, we seem to have overlooked those things. And they are critical to understand if the goal is to remove a person from that influence and then reintegrate them into the larger mainstream community. It's important that we understand addiction and incarceration, they both have these distinct and separate subcultures. They can overlap, so too can homelessness. But within each one, they have their own distinct rules, their own daily activities, their own relationship etiquette, the language that's used, and even the values that are created. This makes it a really welcoming place for people who have the history of incarceration or the history of addiction. And what I mean when I say things like relationship etiquette and language, if I said right now to everybody listening, Newcastle Brown will smack you down, do you understand what that means? Because if you've got an opioid background, I will bet that you understand exactly what that means. It wouldn't take a lot to try and guess your way to the truth, but it is the use of that specialized language that allows us to keep people who shouldn't know our business out of it. And what that does when we have this, this subculture that is a welcoming place for people who have histories of incarceration or opioid use to drug use generally, it creates these really different physical and cultural worlds that folks have to navigate through. Subcultures play a critical role in both the initiation and then the daily maintenance of addiction. And Bill White, who's the guru of the recovery world for those of us who deep dive into this information and work, this is information from Bill. And what he says is that those subcultures play this critical role in both the initiation and that daily maintenance of addiction. And here's the kicker: they can be major obstacles to successful recovery. The amount of change that's needed, it varies. And it varies based on the level of depth that somebody has dived into this culture. It could be isolated from the addiction culture. This is considered the acultural style. And that person would be involved in both the mainstream and the addiction cultures. The bicultural style is the, the bicultural style is the person that's involved in the mainstream and addiction cultures. And then if you are existing almost exclusively within the culture of addiction, it's known as the enmeshed style. And it is within that enmeshed style that you're going to find most opioid users, because there's a need to have a very tight circle of people who meet the needs of each other within that subculture. And that fully enmeshed person knows how to function far better in that environment than in our mainstream community. Now, I'm going to generalize a little bit here, but again, from Bill White, people can become as addicted to the culture of addiction as they are to the central tenets of that culture: the drug use, the safety that you get when you're with your kind, those kinds of things. And altering that relationship involves some change, and sometimes really hard ones, sometimes almost impossible, because as you're changing your relationship, that means the people, the places, and all of the stuff that has supported that relationship. And think about this, sometimes, and certainly in my own case, that has gone on for decades, not just years. Bill tells us that people with an enmeshed style of addiction, well, they may need a period of decompression and a parallel enmeshment within a different subculture to achieve stabilization of their recovery and then maintain it. They also are going to require guides that assist them on the journey from the subculture to the mainstream culture. Allies like peer specialists and recovery coaches, and culturally competent and compassionate addiction professionals, they're vital in assisting with this shift. And Bill goes on to say that it's really important we remind ourselves of the role of culture and subculture in process of addiction and recovery. Because if recovery is a journey between two worlds, then it's on us to provide a fully developed culture of recovery to overcome the pull back to that subculture. It's important that we understand the effect of existing deeply within these subcultures is that as a person in active addiction, and especially in early recovery, gets pulled toward the mainstream culture, he or she is going to stick a toe in that recovery water in that mainstream culture. But I promise you, they will keep their other foot planted firmly in that subculture. Because if anything stressful or negative occurs from those interactions in mainstream culture, and I'm talking about, things like, you have your kid taken away, or, you just lost your driver's license for non-payment of child support, or any of the hundreds of different things that can happen. It is not only easy to go home to your subculture, it is embraced by the members of that culture as a return to the fold. That is powerful. It took me moving 3,000 miles from the area that I used heroin in. I had to do a complete cutoff of every single person that I used to associate with. And then I've spent 2 decades working to remove myself from all the vestiges of those subcultural behaviors, the specialized language that's been used, and honestly, the comfort and the familiarity that really comes from spending almost 40 years fully enmeshed in a drug subculture. Now, it's been 23 years since I've used any illegal substance or participated in any of those subcultures that I belong to. And I am still to this day extracting maladaptive behaviors and language that I used for decades that create and trigger unconscious biases automatically when those thoughts arise. And we know that those biases and the internalized stigma that often accompanies it can have devastating effects on a person's desire to obtain treatment. In fact, it is stigma and bias that are the #1 reason that people don't come for treatment. Now, the punitive policies of the early 1990s, they just failed. It didn't deter any drug use. And in fact, it's really exponentially increased stigma towards folks with incarceration and or behavioral health histories. The risk of facing criminal penalties, coupled with intense guilt and shame and isolation that stigma creates, it is proven to discourage folks from seeking help. And it also promotes risky practices that increase rates of infectious disease, overdose, death. Law enforcement assisted diversion programs actually give cops discretion to divert people who have behavioral health needs, including substance use treatment. There was a 3-year eval of the Seattle program, showed that lead law enforcement, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. It's the law
Assisted diversion.
Thank you. Thank you, Emo. They fared better. The participants in that program fared better in multiple ways when we compared to control participants who were arrested, taken into custody, had the criminal charges filed against them.
I was talking to a group of law enforcement officers here in Orange County, and I'm a person who uses medication-assisted treatment for my recovery, and I had shared that with the officers, and the question came up, they wanted to know if I was still on buprenorphine and how long potentially I might stay on that medication, and I was grateful for the opportunity to share with them that in my situation, and from what I understand about this medication, is that the longer a person stays on this medication, the more successful or the more better their chances of a successful outcome are. And it's helpful to address some of these stigmas when you're dealing with people in the law enforcement community, because there is a lot of potential for diversion. But I think as we're starting to understand, the benefits far outweigh the risks.
Evidence-based medications like methadone and buprenorphine help people remain in treatment. It decreases opioid use and it reduces criminal activity. Unfortunately, the justice system, and especially courts and correction professionals, they benefit slow to integrate medication-assisted treatment. And there was a 2010 survey of drug courts showed that although 98% reportedly had participants with an opioid addiction, only 56% offered MAT. Overdose education and naloxone distribution is less established across the criminal justice system, and the number of law enforcement agencies carrying naloxone has increased steadily in recent years, but only a few jurisdictions are really adopting corrections-based overdose education or providing naloxone to folks as they leave custody and re-enter. And that's critical. That's a critical intervention point, because we know, we've got the evidence that overdose rates in the first 2 weeks following a person's release from a state prison or from a jail were 129 times more likely to die from an overdose compared to the general public. A North Carolina study found that formerly incarcerated people were 40 times more likely to die of an opioid overdose 2 weeks after release. And strategies to reduce the harms that come with drug use don't necessarily take place at specific criminal justice intersteps, but still need cooperation from the criminal justice system. Now, we're going to talk about harm reduction a little bit, because things like access to syringe service programs, that's a critical resource in stopping things like hepatitis C, HIV, and other illnesses that are related to injection that people who use drugs often do. Law enforcement discourages almost always the use of these facilities, and they target enforcement efforts around needle exchange or drug paraphernalia laws to actually arrest folks who are returning used injection equipment. They also may be unaware or just unfamiliar with the benefits of a program like that, like the reduction in the number of needle stick injuries that law enforcement officers experience themselves. Harm reduction works to actually save lives, especially the lives of returning citizens.
I just want to add a piece to the harm reduction component as well. Until recently here in Florida, fentanyl test strips were illegal and considered to be paraphernalia, which is sort of mind-blowing at some point. But so understanding, strengthening of social capital and incarceration of reentering persons. I want to talk about the importance of the collaborative relationship with probation versus the adversarial role of, and punitive role. We just in my past year dealing with my old probation officer, as I mentioned, we've been able to get all the officers to start carrying Narcan now, which has been amazing. Just reported a reversal yesterday that was from Narcan that I gave to their team. And the successes that we're seeing recently as a result of implementing some of these changes towards a more collaborative approach. I go over to the probation department at least on a monthly basis for a program they have called Face It, where we bring all the people on supervision in that are new and tell them about the mission of the probation DOC, which is to help support people and bring them towards a more self-directed life. I think the key piece of this is that when I go and engage with them, it allows them to feel like it's okay for them to engage in trusting their probation officer as well. And along with this slide, peer support is an evidence-based practice appropriate to build and leverage social capital, and something you may also, and along this lines, is recovery capital. People are at the center of this whole thing. We have to have relationships. We have to have a partnership, cultural competence, emotional intelligence, emphasize accountability rather than punishment. Peer groups are a great way to help facilitate the improving or strengthening of social capital. We want to build quality relationships. Everyone I tell that I'm mentoring through supervision is to build a relationship with your officer. Don't just check in and check out on a monthly basis. Call them, let them know what you're doing. Humanize yourself. Allow them to know that you're just another person, and they're going to be much more willing to work with you. Using technology is another great way to engage. Texting was one of the reasons why the person I was talking about earlier was able to get put back on an ankle monitor rather than sent back to prison, because he per my checking in with him, I said, at least send them a text and let them know you're okay. And then we were able to facilitate him going back in and turning himself in. Emerging social capital principles use data and logic. Keep track of this information. I've seen a lot of organizations make the mistake of not tracking a lot of their data. It's important that you see these trends and how it improves the quality of your supervision. Use experts to guide decisions. Lastly, ensure that there's always a space and an opportunity for connection. Drug courts, also called treatment courts, were started in Miami-Dade County, hard to believe actually. In the heat of the war on drugs, judges and law enforcement realized that lots of people were moving through the justice system, and they had very similar characteristics: a substance use disorder that contributed to criminal behavior. And they also cycled through the justice system one or more times previously. Most of them are also charged with nonviolent crimes. And I heard a statistic recently that Orange County, where I live, is the largest mental health provider in the state. That's the county jail. Actually, very hard to believe, or not hard to believe, depending on where you're from. Drug courts use specialized court docket programs that target adults. There's also family courts for dependents, veterans court, mental health court, and competency court we have here in my local area. This helps adults who are charged, or youth charged with a crime and pending charges, to kind of get diverted, and usually results in a withhold of adjudication if they complete successfully. As you can see from the graph, around 2004, the word about the successes in drug court caught, and we're moving around in the criminal justice system. At December 31st, 2019 was the latest data we could find. There were 38,563 treatment courts in operation in the United States. About 90% serviced adults and 9% serviced juveniles. They operate quite differently than traditional courts, and we can see what that means by this short video.
Drug addiction has become an unprecedented public health crisis. We cannot solve this with incarceration. Drug courts are part of the solution. Drug courts, also called treatment courts, are specialized court programs for persons with substance use disorders. Instead of simply going to jail, the programs give people the opportunity to enter long-term treatment and agree to court supervision. Drug courts address the root causes of drug use and criminal behavior, like poverty, mental health issues, physical health, and unemployment. Participants in drug court maintain recovery from drugs, take on responsibilities, and work towards lifestyle changes. Members of the court help participants in their progress towards these goals and hold them accountable for lapses in improvement. Unlike traditional court, drug courts take a collaborative approach to justice. The judge, prosecutor, defense attorney, and probation official work collaboratively. As a team, they use their individual expertise in partnership with public health professionals such as treatment providers, social services, and mental health specialists. Together, they seek solutions that benefit the participant. Ultimately, drug courts reduce crime and affect real change in lives. To learn more, visit ndcrc.org.
So here's the big question. Are drug courts effective? Do they work? And whenever I'm trying to pitch an idea like this, it's always best to improve or to introduce the idea of how much money it can save. Sending someone to a drug court instead of state prison can save up to $13,000 per participant. Family courts reduce the likelihood of reentry into foster care by 2/3. Every state and U.S. territory utilizes drug court, and adult drug courts reduce recidivism by as much as 45%. 75% of drug court graduates remain arrest-free compared to just 30% of those released from prison. Juvenile drug courts reduce recidivism by as much as 40%. So there is no doubt that these programs work, and I am actually a living example of that.
Thank you again. You are a living example of that. And, as I said earlier, that just your courage to stand up and advocate for yourself, look at what it's done for people in Florida. And, obviously these aren't your numbers, but now Florida, at least your judge in Florida, may be contributing to these. And you certainly are one of the people that are, this statistic. Drug court didn't exist when I had to go through the criminal justice system. They had the California CRC, California Rehab, which was prison. But here's the problem. Everybody that I knew who went through the CRC program told people who were using and involved in criminal justice, do not take that deal. And the reason that they argued for that was because it had a 7-year parole tail. And many of the folks, particularly back in the late 90s, at a time when we didn't know much about the neurobiological impact of a thing like an opioid use disorder, they returned to use over and over and over. And a 7-year period is a long time to be under pretty strict supervision. So Emil's just a great example of the power of drug court. And now with Emil's influence in drug court and other peers as well, we're changing perspectives. We're bringing evidence-based treatment where it desperately needs to be. And let me tell you that in terms of the value, as Emil asked, was drug court effective? The value of peers overall, why I'm sure in this slide isn't to rattle off all of these things, increase self-esteem, increase social support, decrease substance use, increased engagement in self-care and wellness. Emil's already covered a bunch of those, but the value of peers is incredible. And this information here, much of it is pretty old now. And much of it, because it's cited and sourced, you can trust. And what I can tell you is that these numbers have increased where they should, and they've decreased where they should as well since we started doing this work and evaluating these approaches in, I think, about 2013. So the value of peers is almost exponential. It's hard to put a value on it, but I can tell you this: if any of you who are listening has a family member, a loved one who's had an overdose and has been revived with naloxone, you likely have a peer somewhere in that mix that you owe a debt of gratitude to. Now I'm going to turn this back over to Emil, and we're on our way towards the end of this presentation and into some Q&A.
As peers especially, we understand that some people do have a healthy mistrust of systems, and thinking about understanding and adapting about how peers like community health workers bridge those barriers and biases, not only to care, but with an understanding of addressing the social determinants in each case individually.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, one of the big driving factors, I think, between, or reason why I wanted to get involved mainly as a volunteer with supporting people that are under supervision in my area is because, one thing that really helped me when I was on probation was establishing and building a relationship with my probation officer. She's actually on the call. I see her name at the bottom of the screen. I invited her to jump on, but building that collaborative relationship, allowing my voice to be heard when I needed something. And then, now seeing people that are going through the probation as well, allowing them to know that, I was able to feel supported and connected by this person, and that it's okay for them to, become a little bit vulnerable and allow themselves to be connected and supported in the same way. This is all about fostering, building relationships, building trust, and I think kind of go back what Joseph just mentioned. I mean, he said sadly, but all of our lived experience has this enormous value to be able to help other people, and I don't want to diminish that in any way. Like, we have an immense capability to a capacity to help others in a way that not everyone has, and I think that should never be undervalued. Yeah, it does help to have someone who's already been through these challenges. With navigating resources, a big part of peer support. We've already experienced having to go through and vet these resources ourselves, and it is helpful to have someone who can guide you in those directions. Resources is part of a big part of what we do here. Is just some areas are resource rich, some of them aren't, but the area that I'm in here in Central Florida is rich with resources, but it's hard to know which ones are appropriate, which ones aren't, which ones are right for the right individual, because there's a lot of different idiosyncrasies per se for specific individuals require or have specific needs. So thank you so much for everyone who participated and came. I hope you learned something.
I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you want to request technical assistance, by all means, please do.